We finished the negative feedback. Let's look at the positive feedback. The positive feedback is a response happen in your body. It's not stable. It's like I use microphone and I come to stand too close to the speaker. So what happens is the signal being amplified by the microphone come out to the speaker will be picked up by the microphone and amplified again. And what happens is that you will hear a sharp, loud noise. And that's the positive feedback. So it's not stable. It's the response happen in your body. So your body want to have a stable environment, homeostasis. And positive feedback is not stable. And that's why your body don't have too many. There are response happen in your body. They don't contribute to homeostasis. And let's look at the positive feedback. The first one is blood clotting. And we will see this response in Unit 4. That's when you are bleeding. And the blood in your blood, when they come out of the blood vessel, and the platelet, that's the one responsible for blood clotting. Platelet are the blood cells. They touch the chemical molecule. Chemical molecule is called the blood clotting factor. And they will start the chemical response. Clotting response happen. And when this response happen, it's a positive feedback. It will become bigger and bigger. They will add other blood clotting factor and also red blood cell. It's a positive feedback. And eventually it becomes bigger and bigger. It stops the bleeding. So that's one positive feedback example. The other two only happens in female. Milk letdown reflex. And that's another positive feedback. And giving birth, that's the third one. So your body, you totally have 3 positive feedbacks. And your body want to maintain a stable environment, that's homeostasis. And when you fail to maintain a stable environment, your body gets sick. Or the worst scenario, you may die. And let's look at the anatomy part. You want to maintain an anatomical position. That's because when you move, your body relative position change. That's why you need to have a reference point, and that's anatomical position. So that's the definition of anatomical position. So that's the anatomical position. You stand face forward, palm forward, and this anatomical position. And also you need to learn those big words, like what's the big word of your forehead? It's called frontal. And we will keep using this word again. When we talk about the bone in your forehead is called the frontal bone. And when we talk about the brain are divided into different lobes, L-O-B-E. And the lobe in your frontal part is called the frontal lobe. So we will see those words again and again. And in the first chapter, you feel like it's overwhelming. But part of the anatomy is you have to learn the language your future colleagues will speak. So you have to be familiar with those terms. So that's the frontal view. And this is the posterior view. Your abdominal pelvic region can be divided into 4 different quadrants and 9 different regions. So let's divide them into quadrants. It can be divided into the right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left lower quadrant. So 4 different quadrants. How do we use it? We can say your liver is in what quadrants? So you know your liver is in the right upper quadrant. Your appendix is in what quadrant? Your appendix is in the right lower quadrant. That's around here. So we have different quadrants. It can be also divided into 9 different regions. Right hypochondriac, epigastric, left hypochondriac. Right lumbar, umbilical, and left lumbar. Right inguinal, hypogastric, and left inguinal. So totally 9 different regions. And because of these 9 different regions and 4 different quadrants, you are able to divide your organ into different quadrant or different region. And these terms, anterior, posterior, superior, inferior, lateral, medial, proximal, distal, they are a pair. So you have two different body parts. So one is anterior, the other will be the posterior. And this is how we describe those terms. So the anterior, posterior, like your nose is anterior to your head. That's one term. Proximal, distal. So proximal is closer to your body, and distal, proximal, distal is you have to think your body like octopus. So the head part is proximal, and that's the distal. Medial, lateral. Medial, lateral is you have a center line, so close to the center line is medial, and lateral is away from the center line. And superior is higher, inferior is lower. So this part, you can use your textbook. It's a very detailed explanation. So these are the relative terms. So it means your shoulder to your wrist. So your shoulder will be proximal and your wrist will be distal. When we have an organ, we'll cut the organ. We don't randomly cut it. We always cut them into 3 perpendicular planes. So we have the transverse, frontal, and sagittal plane. So all these 3, 90 degrees perpendicular to each other. So these are the 3 planes. Frontal cut the body to the anterior and posterior. Sagittal cut the body to the medial and lateral, to lateral. Transverse cut the body to the superior and inferior. That's the magician cut. If you like when you were kids, you like magician, you cut human body into half. That's the transverse plane. So these 3, 90 degrees perpendicular to each other. And all the models you see in this class, they also cut into these 3 planes. Your body are covered by cavity. And this cavity, their main function is protection, put organs in. So you can divide them into the dorsal cavity and the ventral cavity. So these are the ventral cavity. And these are the organs put inside. And your ventral cavity can be divided into the thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavity. So there's a big separation of them. There's the diaphragm. There's the diaphragm. There's the muscle separate, used for breathing, and separate thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavity. So that's your ventral cavity. You have the thoracic and abdominal pelvic. In the thoracic, you have a cavity cover the lung. It's called the pleural cavity. So pleural cavity is a double membrane, covers the lung. And in the heart, you also have a double membrane cavity cover the heart. It's called the pericardial cavity. So that's in your thoracic cavity, you have these 2. And that's the diaphragm, separate thoracic cavity away from abdominal pelvic. So this part is abdominal pelvic cavity. And can be divided into the abdominal cavity and pelvic cavity. There's no physical separation of abdominal and pelvic. So if it's lower to the pelvic bone, and that's the pelvic cavity. The other are abdominal. And what's the peritoneal cavity? There's a double membrane cover all the organs in your abdominal pelvic cavity. So that's peritoneal cavity. This is very similar to the pleural cavity, cover the lung, and the pericardial cavity cover the heart. And peritoneal is the double membrane, covers all the inner organs. Most of them are digestive organs in your abdominal pelvic cavity. Okay, that's it.